In this video, I'm going to be covering how to paint the copper trim on Death Guard Space Marines with an interesting pink twist to make your Death Guard stand out from the rest. So, without any further ado, let's cue the music. To start out with, I'm going to be applying a base coat of Decayed Metal from scale 75 all over the areas that I want to be the copper trim. Now this is a really dark brassy copper colour and it's a really fine particulate, and I really do recommend the scale colour metallics. And this is going to be our shadow tone for the trim. We're not going to be using any washes in this tutorial, it's all going to be layered up using various stages of metallic paint. So with this, we're just taking a small brush, adding a little bit of water to ensure that it flows smoothly, and then very carefully come in and paint all of the areas that we want to be this metallic trim. And try to take your time with this, but don't worry if you make any mistakes. If you do, wait for it to dry and then come back in with your base colour for the armour and touch up any mistakes that you've made. And it's just a matter of taking your time and going around all the areas of the trim on your Death Guard miniature. And here's the miniature with all of the areas that I want to be copper painted in with a nice even base coat. For our first highlight, we'll be adding some pink tones into this copper, which is going to give it that fantasy sci-fi feel rather than a straight neutral copper. And to do this, I'll be coming in with some Garnet Alchemy from scale 75. The alchemy paints from scale 75 are more of a coloured metallic range. They still behave very similar to your standard silver gold metallic paints, but they have those different colours that really allow us to put some highlights that pop onto our miniatures. And with this colour, I'm not doing anything fancy. All I'm doing is painting in all the raised areas, leaving our original decayed metal into all of the recesses. The areas that you want to really think about what's going to be in light and what's going to be in shadow are the bits of trim on the Death Guards that are going to be on the elbows, on the shoulders, and around the leg armour. Because this is mutated Mark III armour, it's absolutely covered in this trim. And with the example of this Plague Surgeon here, this tabard is casting the inside of his leg in shadow, and you might find that on the standard Plague Marines. A lot of them have that chainmail or loincloth affair that's going on with standard Plague Marines, and the same theory applies here. Think about where the light is coming from the model. So I tend to do a top down or a 45-degree angle pointing towards the model, and anything that you think is going to be darker than normal, anything that's going to be cast into shadow, leave that the decayed metal. So I'm picking out a few reflexes on those darker sections just to give it some shine, but generally with this I'm looking to cover the majority of the decayed metal on a lot of the model. Anything that you leave in shadow is really going to help stylize the look that you want to go for. And if you don't like this color, if you think it's gone too pink, don't worry. You can always wait for it to dry and paint over with your original decayed metal. And this isn't a very pink color, it's sort of a medium copper color with a little bit of pink added into it. The bells on these Death Guard Plague Marines are a really good area of where you can do some stylized highlights in shadow. You can pick an area that you want to have a light coming from, and you can start to paint in a bit of a directional light on these bells. And you can really allow for some really stark contrast with this colour. As you can see, I've left that inside in shadow, and I've painted most of that outer side in this alchemy colour, which has really allowed this bell to pop out and give it this really cool finish that's going to make your Death Guard stand out from everybody else's. For the next highlight, I'll be coming in with some pure copper from scale 75. and this is a really nice bright copper colour which I'll be using to cover about 50% of all the previously covered areas, and this is going to add some nice bright orangey tones and really sell this as a copper finish onto the model. And I'm looking at picking out all of these raised areas. I'm picking out any edges, but if I'm picking out edges, I want to be doing this from a zenithal perspective. I'm absolutely not going to be edge highlighting anything that's in shadow or the underside of objects, because the light is not going to be hitting that. If we highlight underneath, like we do a full all the way around, like you see on the heavy metal models, it's going to really lose the illusion of that zenithal transition of colour that we've got going on. And it's just a matter of going around and picking these areas out. You can see I'm also doing a few dots and scratches with the side of the brush to add a little bit of texture variety into these highlights. And you can skip these or you can do these if you want, but I really like the different variations that it adds, and it looks like you spent a lot more time on the model than you actually have done, and it's just by having a little bit of paint on the brush with a fine tip and doing little touches, little dabs and little sideways strokes. And don't worry if you go too far, you cover too much, or you cover an area that you don't want to with this colour. Wait for it to dry and come back in with the previous colour and start redefining any shapes and areas that you want to be in that previous colour. And do remember, there is no right or wrong way to do this. If you want this to be more orangey, then you can cover more of the previous colour with this. If you want this to be more of that pinky tone, then you can leave more of that other colour, that Garnet Alchemy, showing. It is entirely up to you, and you might want to change this up between different members of your squad to give them all a different feel and a different aesthetic. These are veterans of the Long War. They've been trudging around the rot, disease, decay for 10, 11,000 years. None of them are going to be completely identical in their corruption. For a last optional highlight, I am coming in with some Ruby Alchemy from scale 75, and this is a pretty bold pink metallic paint, and with this I'm going to be picking out all the areas that I want to be the brightest on this trim. So where the light is going to be hitting the strongest, on rivets and things like that, I'm just going around and picking out all of these really high profile details that are going to cause the model to pop. If you want to keep a more traditional copper feel with a slight pink hue, you can skip this step and leave it at the previous one, but I like the last little addition that this pink metallic adds into the copper to give it that really nice warm science fantasy feel. And with that, the copper trim on this Death Guard Space Marine is now complete. I do really like these alchemy paints, and the pink twist give this a really vibrant, unusual colour that still reads as copper but really pops against that more pastel green tone that the Death Guard have. And if you liked this video, why not consider subscribing? It's free of charge, it helps me out, and you get further tutorials just like this one in your YouTube feed. So, until next time, folks.